number 6, the opening Saturday in October of the 2025 college football season. As we say hello and welcome to Big Ten Breakdown, I am Ben Stevens. It is your Week 6 pregame show. 7 games in the Big Ten, 6 of those 7 a pure conference matchup, and 1 non-con game here to kick off the opening Saturday of October as we get deeper and deeper into 2025. And as we go further in a season, the more there is to learn about each of these Big Ten schools for the remainder of this college football campaign. A reminder, wherever you are getting your favorite shows, whether that's Apple, Spotify, and podcast form, or wherever, follow, like, subscribe, do the same on YouTube, and make sure you are staying in tune with everything the I-80 Club is providing. That's Volleyball State. That's Jack and Josh's coverage around Nebraska football, of course, back in action this week in Lincoln for the Cornhuskers. And you can get all of that great content and coverage advertisement free. That's patreon.com/I80 Club. That's I80 Club. It is your Week 6 pregame show. The things that you must know to be ready for a Saturday slate within the Big Ten. The key matchups and the numbers that you need to get ready for a new college football weekend. This week, Week 6, maybe not as prolific as our previous 2 Saturdays. Week number 4 felt like that first true significant Saturday of conference action. Last weekend to end out September, week number 5 was glorious. As we shared on the post-game show, it lived up to that hype and its billing. Let's call a spade a spade. Week 6, maybe not as exciting nor glorious as the weekends prior or the weekend ahead. Week 7 is going to be a banger. It is the only weekend of the year outside of the final weekend of the year that all 18 Big Ten schools are playing one another, a full conference weekend. But that's Saturday, October 11th, even Friday, October 10th. On this Saturday, October 4th, we still break down all of the knowledge that you need on your Week 6 pregame show. We didn't necessarily have a front runner when it came to our choice and selection of the Big Ten Breakdown Game of the Week. Which matchup would earn that distinct honor? Well, we decided that for the Game of the Week for week number 6, maybe not the conventional one, maybe not where Big Noon Kickoff is going to the Big House in Ann Arbor, number 20 Michigan hosting Wisconsin. 17.5-point spread in favor of the Maize and Blue. How about the primetime game in C-Bus at the Shoe? The number 1 team in the nation, Ohio State, hosting a 3-1 Minnesota team. Not quite there either. We go to what is my favorite game of the week. Heck, no offense, this is my show. So the Big Ten Breakdown Game of the Week for week number 6 of 2025, maybe not where you would presume, but in College Park, Maryland. It's the unbeaten 4-0 Terps hosting Washington, a 3-1 team. In fact, of our 7 matchups in the Big Ten Conference for this Saturday, this is the only spread that is a single score. It is the shortest number of the weekend. It is 6.5 in favor of the Huskies, leaving Seattle, making the cross-country trip to Maryland to take on the unbeaten Terps. Of course, Washington last week at home, disappointing output, I think you could say, certainly offensively, but that's what Ohio State does to everybody. Now they go on the road, they leave Seattle, they head to College Park. That has been precarious, and that's where we'll start with our Big Ten Breakdown Game of the Week. By the way, kickoff time, 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on Big Ten Network. As we shared, 6.5-point spread in favor of UW, total 52.5. The other number that is key, though, Jed Fish at the helm of this UW program, just 1-5, both straight up and against the spread on the road during his year plus. That only win was this season in the Apple Cup victory in Pullman against Washington State. This game to me is incredibly intriguing. We are going to see, I think, a truer version of both of these clubs in this matchup than maybe we have seen yet this year. Washington has been great, ran into the buzzsaw that is the reigning national champs and still the number 1 team in the country with by far the best defense in college football in Ohio State. Maryland is perfect. 4-0. The non-conference schedule, not overly difficult. FAU, NIU, and the FCS foe in Towson. But then a very impressive victory for this young Maryland squad on the road in Camp Randall 2 Saturdays ago, shutting out the Badgers at the break 20-zip, winning 27-10 at Camp Randall in Madison. I think for me, it legitimized a little bit more of what Mike Locksley is doing here in 2025 as compared to the Big Ten woes, especially in those openers of his full 6 seasons prior. And speaking of this young Terrapin squad, that's exactly what they are. And that will be a highlight here as we break down our Big Ten breakdown game of the week. What a quarterback matchup we have. A true freshman in Malik Washington that is putting up historic numbers. We'll get to that in just a moment. A true sophomore on the other side in Damon Williams, who is doing much of the same for the Huskies. Let's start with Washington. Through 4 games now for Maryland, 1,038 passing yards. It is the most passing yards in the first 4 career games of a power conference true freshman quarterback since Jaden Daniels, who, won a Heisman Trophy and was the number 2 overall pick back in 2019 during his time in Tempe with Arizona State. He has been balling out, but it's not just Malik Washington on the offensive side. It's this young defense and a couple of stud edge rushers, linebacker combos, and Sidney Stewart and Zahir Mathis for Ted Monachino's defense that is causing chaos at the end of their 4th game against Wisconsin. Maryland was tied atop FBS college football with 16 sacks, tied for the most interceptions in the sport as well with 8 INTs. Some of those numbers have changed as we had week 5 and Maryland had the open weekend to end out September. But that's how good this Terps defense has been. And so my key matchup in this game, as we continue to go, before we get to the key matchup, I should say, let's just make sure we highlight what Damon Williams is doing. 8th best passer rating in FBS college football. His worst game for Washington was last week, and yet he only had 4 incompletions against Ohio State, but did not throw a touchdown, did not rush for a touchdown. Last week against the Buckeyes was the only game for Williams where he failed to utilize his legs as he was under duress constantly against that Ohio State defense. But 64 rushing yards in every other game, 8 total TUDs for Williams this year. And again, that kind of plays into the key matchup. It's Damon Williams, it's Jonah Coleman, it's this prolific Washington offense, against everybody not named Ohio State. But we just highlighted the success of this Maryland D so far this year. Last week against Ohio State, Washington allowed 6 sacks and 9 TFLs. Constantly under duress, could not establish the run against that talented Ohio State front. Well, we just told you Maryland entering last weekend, week number 5, tied atop the country in FBS college football with 16 sacks. Ohio State is an otherworldly red zone defense and has been since the beginning of 2024. They are the best red zone defense in the sport in 2025 early. Who's the second best red zone defense in FBS college football? Maryland. 10 red zone trips by their opponents so far this year. The Terps have only allowed 5 scores. That's a 50% hit rate for the opposition in the red zone. That's stellar. And only 2 of those 5 scores have been a touchdown, both coming through the air, where Jonah Coleman and Damon Williams on the other side have been so good at finding pay dirt utilizing their legs. So again, key matchup to me. Some of the issues we saw for Washington offensively and paying off long and lengthy drives with scores and touchdowns. Are they going to be those same issues this week in College Park against the Terps defense that has earned those accolades so far this year? Maryland, one of 6 FBS programs so far in 2025 that has yet to allow more than 2 red zone touchdowns. That's how good Maryland has been. You could argue strength of schedule and an inept Wisconsin offense in a tough spot in that Big Ten opener for both clubs. I'm going to trust that Maryland's defense is here to play. I think it's a really good game. I do believe it's a 1-possession game. I wonder about the cross-country road trip for Jedd Fisch and his Huskies that has not looked all that favorably on Washington as a Big Ten program. I do think Washington gets a win because I just think Washington is a great team. If Maryland wins and starts 5-0, and by no means do I think the Terps are blown out at home or do they look abysmal, and we all say, see, that 4-0 start was a little bit fraudulent. But if Maryland picks up a victory as a 6.5-point home dog on Saturday afternoon, it will be a 5-0 start for the Terps for the second time in 3 years, 2023 the other. It would be the second 5-0 start since 2001. Mike Locksley has the opportunity for his Terrapins football program to make a statement in week number 6. And because all of those reasons coming together, that's our Big Ten breakdown game of the week. Quick thing here. I think this chair might have sunk on me. Would you look at that? All right. Now we're back in full. Hey, a couple of in-show adjustments, like halftime adjustments or in-game adjustments we make here as we roll on with our Week 6 pregame show on Big Ten Breakdown. So the game of the week is Maryland hosting Washington in what I expect to be the most intriguing and perhaps best and most competitive game of week number 6 in the Big Ten Conference. Some other runner-ups for what could have been the game of the week, too. That's our next category. And let's go to the home of the reigning national champs of the number 1 team in college football, that being the Ohio State Buckeyes. Number 1 Ohio State hosting Minnesota, Big Ten game number 2 for both of these programs. Ohio State unbeaten, Minnesota's only loss on the road in Northern California against Cal, and a huge bounce-back victory for the Road Boaters in the Gophers last week at home against Rutgers, overcoming a 2-touchdown deficit early and a fourth-quarter deficit as well. In this one, though, Ohio State booked as a 23.5-point home favorite because it is in prime time, inside the Horseshoe, in Columbus. It kind of has some of the accolades and billing behind it. I don't necessarily expect this game to be all that close. 7:30 p.m. Eastern time kick on NBC. Speaking of games after the sun sets in Columbus, Ohio, hasn't happened often, of course, for the Ohio State program, and the fans in Columbus have let everybody know about it, and rightfully so, for what it's worth. A staple of big noon kickoffs in 2024. First time the Buckeyes have hosted a night game against the Big Ten foe since the game against Michigan State back in November of 2023. It's been a long time, and we can expect a raucous and incredible atmosphere on Saturday night at the Shoe. 23.5-point spread in favor of the Bucs. Game total overall is 43.5. What does that tell you? That Ohio State is expected to do most of the scoring. And that's because Ohio State's defense barely allows any scoring against them. I said it on the Week 5 postgame show. I will remind you here. Ohio State is elite defensively. Ohio State is the gold standard of defense in the Big Ten and really across college football. I expressed some questions, perhaps not fully concern, but questions about Matt Patricia, the new play caller defensively, taking over for a team that just won a national championship with the best scoring defense in the sport that lost 8 guys all drafted in the NFL. 8 starters off that national title-winning defense to the National Football League. In the play caller in Patricia, in the guys that have filled the void with talent, have not skipped a beat, like Caden Curry, who is one of the best edge rushers and defensive linemen in this conference and in this sport. Freaks of nature at the linebacker spot, like Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, and maybe the best defensive player in college football in Caleb Downs. Ohio State is elite defensively once again. Best scoring defense in the country so far through 5 weeks. In 4 games, the Buckeyes defensively have only allowed a total of 22 points. They are the only team in the country that has allowed fewer than 31 points in total so far this year. 2 touchdowns against Ohio State. That's it. Early in the game against Ohio, late in the game against Arch Manning in Texas in that season debut. When we talked about Maryland's red zone defense, Ohio State, there is none better. Again, I shared it on that Week 6 postgame or Week 5 postgame show, but a reminder. Since the start of last year, since the beginning of the 2024 season, Ohio State has now played in a total of 20 games. You play 20 games more than anybody in the sport when you win a national championship. Only 45 red zone trips against this Buckeyes defense. Only 16 red zone touchdowns allowed in 0, zilch, nada so far in 2025. So for me, that key matchup, how many points can the Golden Gophers score? Not the most optimistic update on Minnesota stud running back in Darius Taylor early in the week from PJ Fleck. I'm not sure he plays. I'm not sure how healthy he is. Last week, Minnesota only ran it for a total of 38 yards against the Rutgers defense, not nearly as good as this Ohio State unit. Drake Lindsey was historic and unreal. 31 of 41, 324, 3 touchdowns without an INT. It's going to be more difficult for the Gophers to generate that offense if they are not truly balanced against Ohio State. So key matchup, how many points can Minnesota score? Their team total is 9.5. Can they get to 10? Can they get to double digits? Does that even mean this game is within 3 scores, 3 touchdowns? I'm not so sure. On the other side, quickly, for Ohio State's offense. Minnesota is still the 5th best rushing defense, 9th best total defense in the country, but did allow nearly 400 yards of total offense against Ethan Kaliakmanis in the Scarlet Knights last week. Can Julian Sayin open it up a little bit as Ohio State gets deeper into Big Ten play? Our other could have been game of the week here on Big Ten Breakdown. That's inside Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, Nebraska, as the Huskers, fresh off a bye, host Michigan State, also fresh off a bye. The Cornhuskers booked as an 11.5-point home favorite. 49.5 is that total. 4 p.m. Eastern time. The kick is slated on Fox Sports 1. Both teams, as I said, off a bye and off a bye following a loss. Michigan State hammered in LA in that late night game against USC, 45-31. Nebraska, oh so close, but that's been the story against ranked foes against the other team from the Mitten, that being Michigan, losing 30-27. And I think we saw some weaknesses exploited in that game for both. Both defenses got gashed. We start with the Spartans. They allowed 523 total yards to SC, 289 on the ground. Nebraska was giving up big play after big play after big play to a lethal Michigan rushing attack. They allowed 286 rushing yards to the Maize and Blue. That was 8.7 yards per carry for Michigan as a team, their second best yards per carry number in a game in program history. But now as we kind of reset after the bye, will Michigan State up that physicality at a spot where they need it? And same for Nebraska on both sides of that line of scrimmage. Here's the good for both. Both young quarterbacks, both sophomores, are playing unreal for the Huskers and the Spartans. Let's start with Dylan Raiola, averaging 284.3 passing yards per game. That's second best in the Big Ten, only behind Jaden Mayava, who had a pretty good day against MSU, more than 230, only 6 incompletions, and 3 touchdowns through the air. That's 15th best for Raiola in terms of that 284-yard per game average in college football. Emmett Johnson was not overly prolific against a stout Michigan rushing defense and front seven, but still averaging 5.5 yards per carry. I think Nebraska will be able to generate that offense, really as they have all year since the opener against Cincinnati against MSU. Aiden Childs on the other side in the last 3 games for Sparty, 10 total touchdowns with only a single interception. In the INT game against the FCS program in Youngstown State, he has been really good and very efficient this year, limiting those turnover-worthy plays, which was a huge cause for concern in 2024. I favor Nebraska. The market favors Nebraska. It's an 11.5-point spread. But what will we see in the key matchup here in this game that could have been the Big Ten breakdown game of the week? The key matchup is Michigan State's secondary. Worst passing defense in the Big Ten so far early in 2025. 263.5 yards per game given up. We saw them get throttled by BC's Dylan Monaghan, by Jaden Mayava, both through the air and on the ground. Can Dylan Raiola replicate that success? If so, Nebraska cruises. But both of these teams enter week 6 at 3-1 overall, each with a Big Ten loss to begin. Who gets that first conference victory in 2025 and who gets back on track the remainder of the way? Really intriguing game, 4 p.m. Eastern time in Lincoln. I favor Nebraska being able to exploit Michigan State's secondary, but how will the Spartans bring that physicality to match? And really the Huskers need to do the same on the other side of the ball as well. Our next category is really to round out our 7 matchups in the Big Ten Conference for week number 6. Category name, just how close will these games be? Let's start with a game in West Lafayette early on Saturday, noon Eastern kick that I actually think is going to be kind of close. Number 22, Illinois, 9.5-point favorite against Purdue. 55.5 is that total. Boilermakers off a bye. Illinois off a huge bounce back home win in the walk-off field goal from David Alano to bounce back after the rout against Indiana. But Illinois, unlike a lot of our Big Ten teams, has not had an open weekend so far this year. And Illinois does not after this weekend either. They get ready to host the number 1 team in the country in Ohio State. So what are we going to see out of that mentality and resolve for the Illini that was on full display last Saturday in Champaign? But another early kick in West Lafayette inside Ross Ade against a rested Boilermakers team. 9.5-point spread. I think we will flirt with that margin for a good majority of 4 quarters. What will the ending result be? And I think it's a really good game to gauge how Purdue is going to look under Barry Odom in year number 1 against Big Ten foes. Will they stay in games? Will they be competitive based on what the expected outcome is from the spread? Will Purdue be within 1 score? Might they be able to steal an upset at a certain point in 2025? I think this presents a pretty good picture of that for the Boilers on Saturday. Most of the betting handle thinks Purdue can stay in this game. It is on Purdue as the underdog. 55.5 is the total. I think we get some points. Purdue allowed 56 points to Notre Dame as a team and nearly 540 total yards. Purdue is the second worst or third worst scoring defense in the Big Ten. Illinois hasn't been much better. And that's a little bit of a concern for me for this Aaron Henry squad that wasn't overwhelmingly great a season ago in 2024. But of course, with so much returning production, you expected that to maybe look a little bit more dominant in 2025. Not necessarily. The Fighting Illini, the third worst total defense in the Big Ten, allowing nearly 375 yards per game. They're giving up a lot of chunks. They're also the fifth worst scoring defense in the conference, allowing 23.4 points per game. And when it got late against SC a weekend ago, Jaden Mayava and Mekhi Lemon had their way to fight the Trojans back into that game, down by 2 touchdowns twice in the second half. Again, slightly concerning if it can be exposed by the Boilermakers, who have had a great offensive scheme this year. Under first-year offensive coordinator, I always forget his first name. Forgive me, John Henson? John Henson? That doesn't sound right. Let's do a quick little look up here. The new offensive coordinator for Purdue, who came over from Lincoln Riley's system. He was under Lincoln Riley in SC, Josh Henson. I knew it was very close to that. Josh Henson, who has been very creative. We have seen Ryan Brown throw, run, and catch a touchdown this year. I think Purdue might be able to put up some points against the Illini. Will it keep the Boilers at arm's length and within striking distance? That's the story of this game. What Illinois, I think, at a key matchup here, how many points can Purdue put up? What does that Illini defense look like? What has kept Illinois maybe from having some of those defensive flaws fully exposed is their ability to create chaos and turn the football over, right? 5 turnovers in the huge road win in Durham against Duke. They forced 2 turnovers last week against USC. Jaden Mayava's first interception thrown of the year and that fumble of Wayman Jordan on the opening drive for Southern Cal where they were moving near that end zone. That will be key for Illinois. Ryan Brown has been turnover prone. Can he keep those turnovers at bay? And can Purdue keep points scored in this game to get close to what Illinois is going to do to keep it competitive? I think that's a sneaky good one in that early window, noon Eastern time on Big Ten Network in West Lafayette on Saturday. Again, big spot for Illinois to keep the train working toward 10 wins and maybe a college football playoff spot with number 1 Ohio State back for a big noon kick in Champaign the week following. How about this next game? Wisconsin traveling to the Big House to take on number 20 Michigan. Both teams fresh off a bye. And Wisconsin enters the most grueling month of October I think you will find in all of college football. The reason we ask in this category, just how close will these games be? I think this is a perfect representation of it. It's a 17.5 point spread in favor of the Wolverines. The total is 43.5. It is our big noon kick on Fox on Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern time. This is the second time already this year for Wisconsin they will be booked as a 3-score underdog. Of course, the road game in Tuscaloosa against Alabama, the road game here against Michigan. 27 times in the last 10 full college football seasons since 2015, the Badgers have been booked as an underdog in games. 27 times in total. That's it. 12 of the 27, approaching half under Luke Fickell now, as Wisconsin will be the underdog in Ann Arbor on Saturday. We expect Danny O'Neil to be the starting quarterback. The injuries have been such a big concern for Luke Fickell at the quarterback position in his 3 years. For whatever reason, the bad luck keeps on biting the Badgers, but Danny O'Neil saying at practice this week he has been taking most of those first team reps. I think one of my key matchups in this game, can Wisconsin run the football? They haven't been able to this year. Fewer than 118 yards per game on the ground. That's third worst in the Big Ten Conference. That's not Wisconsin football, and Jeff Grimes was supposed to bring that back in his offensive scheme this year. However, Michigan can and has and will run the football incredibly effectively. The Maize and Blue, one of 9 teams in FBS college football, averaging at least 250 yards per game on the ground. And Justice Haynes has been incredible in his 4 games in the Maize and Blue. He is averaging better than 134 rushing yards per game. That is 3rd best in the nation. What Wisconsin has been good at, and you can argue they have not been tested on the ground yet. Alabama can't run the ball so far this year. Maryland is the worst rushing offense or 2nd worst rushing offense in the sport. Wisconsin's defense is the best rushing defense in terms of yardage allowed so far in college football, only giving up 50 yards per game. Again, to me, that is the key matchup. Who runs the damn ball and who establishes it better on Saturday in Ann Arbor? You would have to favor Michigan to do just that. But can Wisconsin keep it out of Bryce Underwood's hands? And can they defend this Michigan rushing attack that has been so lethal? The numbers so far would say, yeah, probably. But is that a representation of who Wisconsin has played on the ground? And will the dam break here against the Wolverines? Another small key matchup, if you will, is how Bryce Underwood performs at home in his young Michigan career versus on the road. Now, the road competition has been a lot more difficult than New Mexico and CMU inside the Big House. But the 2 road games for Bryce Underwood, 21 of 46 overall, fewer than 150 passing yards in both against Oklahoma and a good Nebraska secondary. 2 very good defenses, but still should be mentioned because in the games in Ann Arbor, at least 235 yards through the air. Both of his touchdowns this year thrown in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And the only game he has rushed for more than 100 yards on the ground against the Chippewas, of course, that one at home. How does Bryce Underwood look at home against this Wisconsin defense? Again, I think this will be very emblematic of what we can expect from the Badgers in this grueling and incredibly difficult stretch of these 4 games in a row in October. It's Michigan, it's a rivalry game against Iowa, it's Ohio State, and it's Oregon before this month is through. And if this month gets through and Wisconsin could drop all 4, and if they don't look competitive in all 4 of those games, even for a minute, then you really grow concerned for how much longer Luke Fickell is going to have to reside in Madison. The buyout is large, $25 million. It will be the 2nd largest buyout in the history of college football. That is saying something. But you also have to see something out of Wisconsin, might we, on Saturday in the Big House. I'm not thinking they win this game. I'm not even sure how close it is. The Badgers have already spurned me so far this year, but can they stay competitive? Can they keep this a 1-score, a 10-point, even flirting around 2 possessions, but maybe in possession of the football throughout all 4 quarters in Ann Arbor? If not, those growing calls and chants of Fire Fickell are only going to pick up in volume in Madison, Wisconsin. Next game up, we go to the Rose Bowl. It's UCLA hosting number 7 Penn State. Again, this category is just how close will these games be? We'll see, because it's not even so much for UCLA here. The Bruins winless. They have not led for even a single second. They are the only FBS program of 136 around college football that has not held the lead at all in the 2025 season. For me, it's more about Penn State. What do we see for a bounce back? This is a sleepy spot, right? The disappointing result in the whiteout against Oregon, faltering on that significant stage once again, and hearing the calls and the narratives all week leading up and now all week following, and questioning if Penn State is ever going to win a big game under James Franklin, if Penn State is ever truly going to live up to the hype of being a national championship contender. And then you go to the Rose Bowl and you take on a struggling UCLA team. Well, if the concern for your program, if that big red flag is failing to play in big games, well, this is not a big game. This doesn't feel like that significant spot. Will Penn State rise to the challenge and look really good in doing so? The reason I say that is Penn State is one of 6 FBS programs. Again, we shared there's 136. The Nittany Lions are one of 6 that has failed to cover a number so far this year. Penn State's going to win this football game against the Bruins. 99.99999% likely that happens. But can Penn State win this emphatically and leave this game with at least a small sliver of confidence that the season is not done for the Nittany Lions? They didn't look great in the cupcake schedule in those first 3 games to start off this year. Of course, they did not look great against the Ducks with that golden opportunity last week. Can they look emphatically great here against a winless UCLA team? And I think the way they do that key matchup here is against the Bruins defense that is the fourth worst rushing defense in all of college football, allowing 233 yards per game. So I would expect a big day for this Penn State offense that needs to continue opening it up. I would expect Katron Allen and Nick Singleton perhaps to both flirt with 100 yards on the ground and help Drew Aller get that confidence back, because the last pass he has attempted was intercepted in double overtime by Dylan Thieneman. On the other side, just a quick bit of news here. Jerry Neuheisel is now the new offensive play caller in Westwood, or in Pasadena. Tino Sunseri, after only 4 games, who got a big spot to be the new OC for UCLA, working under Kurt Cignetti last year at Indiana, mutually agreed to part ways with this Bruins football program. Of course, 2025 has not gone the way anybody imagined that it would for UCLA. So Jerry Neuheisel, who is the tight ends coach for the Bruins, takes over as that play caller. A little bit of fight last week for UCLA in the second half at Evanston, holding Northwestern scoreless. Are we finally going to see Javion Thomas do anything for this UCLA rushing attack? I guess we'll learn from Jerry Neuheisel on Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time kick on CBS. It's going to have the billing of the Rose Bowl and the CBS theme music, but I'm not entirely sure how competitive that game is going to be. And frankly, as we raise the chair here, again, that is all on Penn State. Final game of the weekend, 7th and final, our only non-conference tilt of week number 6. How competitive is this game going to be? Listen, I don't think Northwestern loses at home on the lake to ULM. That's Louisiana Monroe. But the spread is 11.5. Northwestern in 2 weekends is going to host Purdue. It could be, as of right now, I would say projected to be, with home field advantage taken into account, the last game the Cats are favored in all year long. Northwestern is laying 11.5 here, looking for win number 3. And the Hawks, after getting trounced by Alabama, 73-0, week number 2, have actually looked pretty good. 2 impressive wins against Arkansas State and outright as a dog against UTEP the week prior. And what has ULM been really good at this year, at least so far? Defending the run. 16th best rush defense in college football, only allowing 84.5 yards per game. And if you're Northwestern, that's where you want to attack. Caleb Komolafe was fantastic last week for Northwestern in the win against UCLA. 27 carries, 119 yards, and a touchdown. The first 100-yard rusher in the David Braun era in Evanston, dating back, of course, to the start of 2023. But what has been a little bit glaring in terms of an issue has been the aerial attack for Northwestern, which I thought was actually going to be picked up this year by Preston Stone. Quite the opposite. 3 games for Stone against FBS foes. He has only had at most 161 yards. That was in the season opener against Tulane in New Orleans, where he threw 4 interceptions. He is averaging in those 3 games against FBS teams just 137 yards. And in those 3 games against FBS foes, the touchdown to interception ratio is horrific. It's a touchdown, 1 touchdown to 6 INTs. So if they are going to, that being Zach Lujan and Northwestern offense, rely on Caleb Komolafe, and that's where ULM is pretty good at least so far defending things. Yikes. This game might be a little bit closer than we imagine. Northwestern gets the win outside of Chicago on the shores of Lake Michigan. But I wouldn't just look at this game and be like, non-conference, Louisiana Monroe, they got beat by 73 by Alabama, and say, check. This might be a little bit more competitive than we expect. 3:30 p.m. Eastern time to kick on BTN. Those are all 7 of our games in week 6. Of course, coming on Monday morning, a full reaction to the weekend in our week 6 post-game show ahead of a monumental weekend in week number 7. But before we get there, it's week 6. We've got some really good games. We've got some really intriguing matchups. And as we do each and every Saturday in the Big Ten Conference, we are going to learn a ton. Again, a reminder, like, follow, subscribe, wherever you are getting this show, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, doesn't matter. Get it, watch it, like it, and I hope you are following along for this journey throughout 2025. This has been the Week 6 pregame show here on Big Ten Breakdown. I'm Ben Stevens. We'll talk to you on Monday.